Politics of, there we go. Okay, we're back. So the politics of energy transition is something that's also very meaningful to me, and something that Houston is very interestingly situated in that process. So what the reason why I got interested in stormwater and green stormwater infrastructure, I'm sure will not come as no surprise to you, was living here through Hurricane Harvey, which for me, as for many Houstonians, I think was a real you know, you have to go to watershed experience, because what other metaphor qualifies? An experience that changed my life in all sorts of different ways. And ever since then, I've become committed, in addition to the work I do in other parts of the world, with trying to do work here and trying to do work specifically related to stormwater management and climate resilience. Houston has a lot of issues, as you know. It also has a lot of wonders. So we wanted this city to be a strong one, a resilient one, going forward this century and hopefully beyond. And managing our stormwater is increasingly an important part of it. So I came to rain gardens, long story short, through an interest in stormwater and with working with communities that were trying to experiment with green infrastructure as a way to help manage their stormwater problems. So what I am not, so this came up, what I'm not, and I have to disclose this at the beginning, is I am not a native plant specialist. I know nothing, I don't know any Latin, I wouldn't even know where to start. So I can't give you helpful information about what specific plants to put in your rain gardens, but I can tell you why, if all of us here were to make rain gardens, and all of our neighbors and all of our fellow citizens of Houston's were to make rain gardens, we would live in a much less flooded city. That's what I want to talk about.
Right.
All right, so first of all, though, and I'm assuming there's some like basic knowledge of what a rain garden is, but I don't want to assume too much. And this is also a chance for me to show off the work of some fabulous students at the University of Houston, working with Cheryl Beckett, who's a terrific designer. If you don't know her work, you should check it out. She does a lot of cool projects in and around Houston. They had an assignment as part of a team that I was involved in, and you'll see the rest of that research later on, to think about how could we create a set of materials for a citywide rain garden campaign, a campaign to mobilize people to make rain gardens, understand why they could be important for various reasons. And this first image is a very nice two-dimensional image where you see a pretty, standard kind of design, but very kind of stripped down to its bare bones. And you see the water coming off the roof and going into this dugout area, where there's mulch, where there's some plants in there, and you sort of see it's the sort of filtration capacity and the detention capacities there. This next one, also by a different team, has a little bit more of a kind of 3D cross-sectional model, a way of thinking about it too, where you can see the various levels of what a rain garden is. So that's another way of thinking about visualizing a rain garden. This one I think is much more artistic, and the whole theme of this was to kind of put it in it was sort of like a cowboy aesthetic. So they were trying to make something that sort of felt like Texan in that way, and so you can see what the color choices. But again, essentially the same design over and over again. You'll see that there's a kind of a simple form to what a rain garden is. I think a beautifully elegant, simple form to this infrastructure. Here's one I like too, because it also shouts out the association of rain garden design to Hügelkultur, which is in German hill culture, literally. But those of you who planted, has anyone here planted like a Hügelkultur thing? Yeah, okay. So I figured this room, you guys know what that is. But for those of you who don't, it's sort of like a mounded bed, which is created by putting logs and mulch and sticks and other things to create the hill structure, and then planting plants up into it. And the principle is the same. Above ground is below ground. All of that woody, leafy, heavier material helps to sponge up water and hold it. So even if there are periods where there aren't as much rainfall, you still have a nice moist bed from which to grow your plants. And the version that we're looking at here is where you have that sponging woody material down there, helping to sort of hold more water than could be held if it were just an empty depression by itself. And so the rain garden has these different elements, but also this fairly strikingly simple. And here it comes the rain. So what we have at its best is what I call a humble infrastructure. The font here is a little different than what I expected.
Sorry.
You dig a hole, no, it's fine. Dig a hole or a trench, a few feet deep, doesn't have to be more. And in fact, in Houston, you will struggle even to dig a few feet deep, as I know all of you know, and filled with rocks and clay and this and that. What do you put into it? You put into it kind of whatever you have at hand. You could, from a tree that's been felled down the street, you can take the logs from there, branches, sticks, leaves, pretty much anything you have. You fill back in the soil, you plant it over, ideally with local native plants that like water, especially, whose root systems run nice and deep, because those root systems also hold water. And as a rain garden ages, you'll find that it's actually producing new soil out of the decomposition of that woody material. So if you're going to have a long-term rain garden, you have an opportunity to harvest that old soil and use it for some other nice purpose, maybe for a raised bed garden or something like that, and then put in more trees, and the sort of process can the woody material can repeat itself too. And here again is a sort of yet another description. So here's the part that I don't think I can click through on this, but if I could click through and click on that link in the center, it goes to a lovely resource put together by Texas A&M Extension that has an extensive list of plants that are great for Texas rain gardens specifically. And I think it really is sort of a statewide model, because there, even if you're in a very dry place, there are reasons for sponge gardens and rain gardens as ways to manage scarcity of water, as well as what we have in Houston, which is, think of it as a way to manage the excess of water that we often have to cope with in this town. So I won't click on it, but just to say, I've shared the deck. Please feel free to, or to look it up. There's a link there that will go in much more detail into sort of all the different options that you might look to use, some of which I'll hopefully display. So, you know, in sum, when we're thinking about a rain garden and what it could do for us, I think at one level, as just a garden project, it's lovely. They're beautiful. They mature over time and can take on sort of additional depth of diversity of plants as they grow older. But basically, it's just a hole in the ground that you're filling with woody material, earth, mulch, and then planting it over with some lovely native plants. I wanted to break it down into some of its different functions, because I want to talk about, we'll talk more about some of these than others, but first up front of my mind, of course, is this issue of stormwater detention. A lot of what we do in Houston is try to rush water out towards the Gulf. And if there's a moderate rainfall, that's a perfectly good way to handle stormwater, is just get it, you know, through the sewers, into the bayou, and out, you know, to the Gulf as fast as we can. The problem is when you come to events like Hurricane Harvey, or other 1,000-year and 500-year flood events that we seem to be having with surprising frequency, you know, 4 of those in the past decade, right? When you think about that, sometimes there's nowhere for that water to go. In other words, we can rush it into the bayous, but the bayous are already overflowing. We're just rushing into a place where it's spilling back over and creating riverine flooding. So what a better strategy is in these situations is to think of creative ways to detain that water, to slow it down, so that it actually, the river system has more time to evacuate the excess. So stormwater detention, it can help. Rain gardens can help by breaking apart that clayey soil we have in Houston to allow water to infiltrate better. It can help to filter water. In fact, I've seen rain garden designs that are really about cleaning water too, by letting water go through like a terraced set of rain garden, filtered through the earth, and you get cleaner water at the end of it. Making new soil, I mentioned, reducing standing water, because there's water in the dugout of a rain garden, but it's usually not exposed to the air. So I was talking with Diana just before the talk about the mosquito question, and I'll answer it right now. Generally speaking, I think rain gardens will help to reduce the mosquito population by reducing the amount of surface standing water. It's not a guarantee. Diana has some mosquitoes that can even go underground. They're like super mosquitoes. I don't know, but we all have to deal with them here. So it's not a guarantee you're going to have no mosquitoes in your garden. But again, you're taking usually a depressed area, a lower area, digging it out further to work with your local hydrology to make the most of that detention capacity. Shouldn't put it as number 5, but enhancing natural beauty, I think, matters to all of us. Creating beautiful amenities, creating little pocket ecosystems, like there are various kinds of local prairie restoration initiatives, rewilding initiatives that do the same thing, trying to create small pockets. St. Thomas does that. We're trying to do that at Rice too, where you can create a little sanctuary where native species, both flora and fauna, can flourish there as a way of sort of maintaining our biodiversity here and allowing it to thrive. And finally, and the part of it that excites me, again, as an anthropologist, as somebody who works more with people, honestly, than with plants, is the question of how this type of humble infrastructure can be a way for people to mobilize and to engage more directly with infrastructure. I think infrastructure sounds like an important but a pretty boring word to most of us. And when people first said infrastructure is important, that doesn't sound very exciting, doesn't sound that interesting. But infrastructure is at its core, it's not a thing, it's a relationship. What makes something infrastructure is that it allows something else to happen. It enables something else to happen, right? So we live in a world of these infrastructural relationships. And if we engage more with certain types of relationships, and we make better relationships, better kinships in some cases, we might find that that helps to strengthen our connection to the natural world, our social world too, and maybe allows us to work together to address some issues that right now we're for the most part leaving in the hands of experts and specialists and people who are working very hard to do good things on our behalf, but who don't always necessarily have all of the expertise and skills and the diversity in different ways of being a Houstonian. How could they just? So what I want to pivot to now is a little bit more of a deep dive into my research. And I'll try not to go into it in too much depth because I know we don't have that much time, but I'm hoping this little story from another part of Houston, from the northeastern part of Houston, from the areas of Cashmere Gardens there in the lower quadrant and Trinity Houston Gardens. So just north of the 610 loop, just east of 59. This part of Houston that saw some of the worst flooding during Hurricane Harvey and through all of those other major flood events I mentioned too. This part of the city is a part that has been, unlike say the area where I live in Midtown, is an area that hasn't been particularly well defensed by conventional stormwater infrastructure, and where people are beginning to get interested in experimenting with green infrastructure as a way to take back flood control into their own hands. I've already alluded to this. Many of you lived through Hurricane Harvey. I'm not trying to trigger anybody here, other than to say, this is an existential problem for Houston. The fact that we live in a city built in a swamp, essentially built in a swampy coastal prairie, in a time of climate change, and the storms. It doesn't mean we'll necessarily get more storms, but it does mean that the storms that come are likely to become stronger, more intense, and that some events that are not even cyclones might have devastating consequences. And Tax Day is a good example for those of you who remember the Tax Day floods. When I was doing some interviews at Harris County Flood Control, one of the engineers pulled me aside and he said, Hurricane Harvey doesn't worry me. Hurricane Harvey, we knew it was coming. We had plenty of time to prepare, right? But Tax Day was just a storm. It was a storm that didn't even get a lot of advance notice in the news that people should be worried about flooding. But then that storm comes in. So glad we've got some storm activity out here. It really builds the suspense. We'll be okay. I'm sure we'll be okay.
That's you.
Just thank you. I just can do it again. So, it drops 9 inches of rain at the 59 Beltway in just a matter of a few hours. That same storm then goes out west into Waller County and drops 22 inches of rain, right? Cows drowned in fields out there in Waller County during Tax Day. Imagine if those 22 inches had fallen in Meyerland. Right? And that was his scenario. He was like, if 22 inches of rain had fallen overnight in Meyerland, we wouldn't be talking about a hurricane because that would destroy part of the city. There's no escape from something like that. because there was no preparation. It would have just happened. So all I'm saying is like, this is part of our new reel that builds upon an old reel where Houston is always flooded, right? Flooded. The reason why we're not the capital of Texas is because it flooded. The first year it was here, then there was yellow fever, and they said, maybe we'll try Austin. Austin might be fine, maybe we'll try Austin. Not to be too much of a downer, but I want to point out that this is not just the flooding that we have to worry about. There's the rising heat indexes. Houston's getting hotter and hotter. And then anybody who knows me knows I really like to talk about the ship channel, because the ship channel is really the time bomb in our midst. We've got over 5,000 above ground storage containers. They're just above sea level in an area that my colleagues at our severe storm center at Rice say could, if we caught maybe a category 3 storm just the right way. Hurricane Ike was pretty close to that. Could push as much as a 20 to 25 foot storm surge up that ship channel. And we have some terrific civil engineers at Rice who work with companies along the ship channel on strengthening those tanks and modeling their success and failure rates. But I have it in good authority that if we got that type of a storm surge, a 2% fail rate would be pretty modest. It would be very likely to happen, in other words, and that would be 10 times the Exxon Valdez spill, but not in open water inside the soon-to-be third largest city in the United States. So that we are in a precarious situation. A lot of different. This is not the way the rest of the talk is going to go. I just want to be real with everyone here. So what do we do about this? What do we do about this? I'm only going to talk about stormwater management from here on out. We have the second most engineers per capita in the world after Silicon Valley. Thank you very much. So we're deep in engineers. They're probably engineers in the room. Thank you for the work you do. You do amazing things that I can't do. And when I was doing my first projects after Hurricane Harvey, I was working in places like Maryland, and I took photos like this of people who were taking on personal infrastructure projects as a mode of defense and mitigation, just like raising their houses up and then putting really complicated sort of veneers in front of them so it didn't look like it was a Galveston house, but those houses, Galveston houses, right? That's, again, in our lower lying area, something that's undoubtedly part of the solution, but it's not a solution that's available to most people because it's expensive to elevate homes. It's a really cool technical procedure. I watched it happen many times, but not really going to be the solution for most of us. What most of us are relying upon so far is what is generally called in the field gray infrastructure where gray for concrete. There's a lot of concrete being put into projects like this one. This is from near the Willow Waterhole, this particular bit of infrastructure. And it's part of a big project called Project Grays, which is the largest flood control project in Houston since the Addicks and Barker reservoirs were built back in the 1930s, 40s. And Project Grays took 30 years to complete, took almost $500 million to bring into the world, and still Grays flooded heavily during Hurricane Harvey, by which time most of that work had been done. So often the problem with gray infrastructure is it takes so long to build and it's so expensive that it's almost inevitably planning to deal with the last storm or the last couple of storms that might be coming in a world where our climate is changing and there's more moisture in the air and a warmer Gulf that is supercharging the storm system. So this has led to, again, a lot of other possible solutions. The Ike Dike, right? We've heard about the Ike Dike. It's encouraging. $30 billion project at now. It's more like a $60 to $70 billion project apparently. Unclear whether it'll be built. My colleague Phil Bedient at Rice swears it will never be built. It's going to be too expensive. He and his colleagues have developed a much more inexpensive plan to create a barrier in the middle of Galveston Bay to help defend the ship channel area at a much lower cost. But there's a lot of work, a lot of money going into this. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, other people, deep tunnel projects are part of it too. But unfortunately, the problem with a deep tunnel in a place like Houston, which is so low, is essentially you're creating really small underground lakes. There's, again, nowhere for that water really to drain off to at the cost of $100 million a mile. But these are, you're going to see this in the Chronicle, you're going to see it's debated seriously, it's studied seriously. But this is kind of what what I call kind of infrastructural utopias, like people grasping at strings, like how are we going to solve this chronic flooding problem that's probably likely to get worse in the future with more and more sophisticated and expensive engineering solutions. But let me compare that to, again, the humble rain garden. This is what I'm building up to, is thinking about green infrastructure as potentially an alternative to that big, super expensive, super long-term gray infrastructure thinking. And this is something that I learned by engaging communities in Kashmir and Trinity Gardens. As I said, heavily flooded part of the city, a part of the city that doesn't have the kind of drainage infrastructure we enjoy in central and western Houston for the most part. In other words, sewers and grates and things like that for the water to disappear into. Instead, you have open pits, open ditches that are being used for flood control. But after the city, back in the early 2000s, decided it was up to the residents themselves to maintain that infrastructure. It's a lot of work, and it really declined in quality. Also, people dump garbage in the culverts in these areas all the time, so they're getting filled up. But so there's all sorts of issues that are leading to a kind of, even though open pit drainage doesn't have to be a worse form of drainage, if it's not maintained well, it's not going to work so well. And then you have situations like this. These are some photos I took, followed one of those drain canals to where it ends. And I don't know if it's possible to see what I was taking a picture of here, but when you see a drainage, you assume it drains somewhere. And there's a ton of expectation that water is going to go to someplace. In this case, it just makes a little loop. And there's a little hole there that goes underneath some railroad tracks, and there's nothing on the other side. So it has the appearance of the water is going somewhere, but really it's not. So it's kind of I don't know, an optimistic approach. Too optimistic, too idealistic, I don't know. But people in this area are very critical, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of passing over some of the quotes, but they're worth reading if you have a minute, from some of the residents talking about what it's like to feel as though essentially you're being given inadequate infrastructure and that infrastructure isn't being maintained. And then the design of the infrastructure is like a little bit ridiculous as a basis of this. There have been some great infrastructure projects in this area. The biggest one is Project Hunting. And if you go up to Homestead Street, just north of the 610, you'll see the Homestead Basin, which is an area right for native plants. I think it's an area that I hope we can do some real good green infrastructure work in the future, but right now it's mostly just an empty pit. And it may help a lot, some areas that are downstream of it. But again, thinking about the time frame here, this project was proposed in 1948 and was completed in 2020. 75 years, people in this area have been waiting. So I want you to understand the frustration that comes from like waiting 75 years, a whole human lifetime, for a response to chronic flooding issues in your community. And maybe you begin to see why people want to start thinking outside the box about it. And that's what we started to work on. And I've been involved in this project for about 3 or 4 years. I want to acknowledge that a wonderful civil engineer, Dr. Jessica Eisma from the University of Texas, Arlington, first brought me. I'm sort of shameful that she, as somebody in the greater Dallas area, had to show me something wonderful in Houston, but that's how it is sometimes. And she said, I would love to have a social researcher working on this project. What we're trying to do is to tell people in heavily flooded parts of Houston, especially disadvantaged parts of Houston, about green infrastructure, not as a total solution, not as though it will solve everything, but as a way to augment a process of water management, and maybe also doing some other cool things for your communities, like creating more beautiful rain gardens, more permeable pavement, more green roofs, more rain barrels, things that have a lot of possible positive knock-on effects. So this was we gathered in 2022 and started to dig the first rain garden in northeastern Houston. I want to emphasize this is not just a couple of researchers parachuting in. The community got really behind this project and have made green infrastructure now a priority for when they get the opportunity to weigh in on periodical park renovation, when they get an opportunity to become part of the civic process. They talk now a lot more about green infrastructure than they did. And this is, again, what I call infrastructural citizenship in action. It's a way that people can become more part of the process. I think it's something that's really valuable in a place like Houston, where we have, again, multiple kinds of precarity facing us. Infrastructure is a way that we can work collectively to maybe reduce and mitigate some of these impacts. And so I hope that infrastructure will, although seemingly the province of experts and people wearing gray suits and gray offices, I don't know, something like the Terry Gilliam film Brazil, if anybody remembers that. Instead, maybe it's something sexy, cool, something young people want to do, something all of us can be involved in some. And what's really cool about this, and I will read this quote from the community member John, because it shows that it's not just a matter of defense, and it's not just a matter of stormwater. There's a real effort in here that I think connects well to what y'all are doing here, to try to use rain gardens to create and other infrastructure to create beauty, to bring beauty and amenities back to an area where there hasn't been a lot of public investment. So he says, the fun part of it, the part I love, is that you have a lot of older people in this area who have large blocks of property, sometimes just a bare house on the lot. And if someone were to just give them a little insight, a little knowledge, a little know-how, they could use their land in different ways. Bring in some rain barrels for that little garden in the back, get some native plants in there, see? To soak that water up. Plant some trees, which are good for the shade and also help with the pollution from the concrete batch plants. And it beautifies the place too. Folks go, oh, it's gonna be pretty, right? So these photos are just from the creation of that rain garden. So you can sort of see the process that I described of, again, harvesting, working. We actually, in this case, there was a tree that had been felled nearby. We used that tree, recycled it, upcycled it maybe even into this rain garden, put in the leaves and the sticks over it, back in the earth. And here we are creating a mound there in the right image. And this is what it looked like last winter. So this is a winter image, not at its finest and most beautiful, but folks in the neighborhood say it's very pretty. It looks great in the summer. It attracts butterflies and local birds and local animals. So it's doing that kind of pocket ecosystem work too. So this work goes on in the Northeast. We're working on doing some further projects. One at Kashmir High School and across the street from Kashmir High School at Trinity Gardens Park, which is in the process of renovation, adding some green infrastructure elements there. We're also working on a rain garden project and sort of water management project for the Kit Northeast School, which is a bit farther east of there. And other projects too seem to come up. Like we're talking to some folks also now in the Sunnyside neighborhood, which is more southeast Houston, about working within the framework of what they're doing in the neighborhood too, to use green infrastructure for a positive purpose. So I'm almost done, but I wanted to bring it back to where I started and this preposterous title of this talk about 1 million rain gardens and what they could do for Houston. There actually is some math, and this is the only math I'll be showing, but this concept comes from Art's Story. Some of you who live in Houston longer may remember Art's Story, a very visionary and hardworking public infrastructure czar for Harris County, retired I think in 2014 after maybe 20 years on the job, oversaw a lot of really important improvement projects which are keeping your homes dry and your parks beautiful. Keiji Asakura, who's one of the principals of Asakura Robinson, the landscape architecture firm, once told me, is like, he was talking to Art at some point, and Art had said something along the lines of, sort of idly speculating, if every house in Houston just had a small dugout next to it, we might not need Harris County flood control. Like this is, And so I and others in this team kind of wanted to see whether the math worked out. It doesn't quite work out, but you'll see that it can make a big impact. So here we go, Project Raise Again. Big, large gray infrastructure project, $480 million, 30 years to complete, blah, 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 21 miles of channel conveyance. Anyway, bottom line, it detains 3.5 billion gallons of stormwater, which is a lot. So it's done work, even though so many structures and grades did flood during Harvey. More would have flooded and more would have flooded more significantly had it not happened. So I'm not saying it was a waste of money, but now here goes the thought experiment. So we have 782,000 housing structures in Houston. If each of these structures had a small about 10 square meter rain garden next to it. That alone would be a distributed detention capacity of 2 billion gallons. And the reason why distributed is important here is you can have large detention basins that are put in the wrong places. Any civil engineer will tell you this. And that they won't do the job they're meant to do, because we tend to put detention basins where they're convenient for us, where they're economic for us to buy that land and put in the basin, not where the water wants to go, and the water will go where the water wants to go ultimately. So a distributed detention capacity system has the advantage of identifying small wet areas all over the city and taking advantage of making their all right, almost their detention capacity a little bit deeper, a little bit bigger. But it also is more attentive and adaptive to the actual landscape, rather than theoretically where we hope water would want to visit during a rain event. In addition, there are 160,000 businesses in the state. Suppose we ask them to dig a little deeper, literally, make a larger rain garden, 30 cubic meters, sorry. That's an additional 1.3 billion gallons. And then you get total 1 million rain gardens, 3.3 billion gallons of total detention capacity. And the point I would also want to say is, if we were serious about it, it wouldn't necessarily take 30 years to do that. And it wouldn't take $480 million to do. Because you know what it costs us to make that rain garden that I showed you? Nothing. I mean, it cost us some time and some labor. We had to get some shovels from the local tool library. We had to get some wheelbarrows to move the earth around. We were lucky enough to have a felled tree nearby that we could sort of, again, utilize, but it didn't cost us anything. And that really brings down, this is why it's so attractive to people in Northeast Houston. It allows people without a lot of resources to participate in a meaningful project of both beautification, of sort of ecosystem strengthening, and also stormwater management, all at the same time through one kind of beautiful little humble infrastructure. That's why I love rain gardens so much. Final slide. And this is just a thought to you, essentially that, what if instead of waiting for the infrastructural utopia that's going to deliver us from all of these problems, what if we were to actually organize a robust and distributed campaign for a network of rain gardens and similar kinds of green infrastructure projects? I think we would get to where we want to go faster. We would certainly help reduce our chronic flooding, which we need to do. We'd be living with water, I think, in a more deliberate and attentive way, which we need to. And we can't simply just assume that we're going to be living in dry land. Those of us who've lived in Houston for a while know that is really a utopia. You're always living out there. And you'd also have these 1 million beautiful little gardens full of flowers and plants, right, all over the city. And I think, Houston, not a city that's known for its beauty, right? I think when we first moved here, there wasn't even a tourist guidebook to Houston. This was like 15 years ago. There's Austin, Dallas, San Antonio. But you all know Houston's got a lot of beauty. And imagine if we were to augment that beauty further with one rain gardens, like what that city would be like and what it could do next. So thank you.
Thank you, Dominic. That was great. I love that you were in a less advantaged neighborhood to do that work. Bob has some requests for questions.
One question from the virtual audience. How small can a rain garden be to be effective?
Oh, it all depends on your land, right? I think a rain garden can be really small. If you have in your backyard an area that's just a small area where you're seeing water is standing, that could be a rain garden. And maybe it's only like 1 cubic meter or even less. I think, Doreen, the one you showed me was probably, about how many feet is that? 3 or 4 feet.
4 or 5 feet.
So smaller than what we were talking about here, but still a lot's going on there. You've got a lot of different plants. So depending on what you're using it for, I think anything can be helpful. As you know, from Harvey, every inch matters. Like there are a lot of homes that came just to the edge of flooding, sometimes over and sometimes under. That rain garden might have kept water out of somebody's house.
So, the Kidder Institute put out this report like a couple of months ago that Houston lost 80 square miles of green space to development. So I was wondering if that was in your calculation. And then two, how can the Native Plant Society collaborate with you on this 1 million rain garden? We have large speakers that can go out and talk to the different neighborhoods on the importance of native plants.
That would be great, thank you. I'd say we start with 100 rain gardens and we keep adding zeros. I think that I really like, great shouldn't be the enemy of the good, like you have to work, incrementally to make real change happen. And you have to build a network out, so I'm really grateful again for the opportunity to speak here, because I'm speaking to people who are not people I know already, which is wonderful. So now you hear this idea, if it resonates, maybe we can talk further, because as you saw, native plants definitely are the more than just the cherry on top of the sun. I think they really are a big part of it, because that's the plants that live here love water, many of them. They know how to work with water, and that's what we need is more plants that are good with water, because they help our whole ecosystemic process to become robust.
And then we have to be okay with drying out and the drought.
Yeah.
I say let's do it, and I would just make a shameless plug. I've spoken to several HOAs that request something from the society. If we can have an HOA, they will let me speak. I'll be there. We could tell them importance of insurance, and I'll ask them if I can steal his statistics and his.
Absolutely. Oh, and about the loss of land, we've lost so much land to the west, so much of the Katy Prairie, which was our natural giant sponge garden, helping to keep Houston drier. That plus the subsidence from groundwater pumping has meant parts of Houston have lost 10 feet, just from subsidence alone over the course of the 20th century. Now we don't pump as much groundwater, so that's slowed down. But we're going to want that elevation back in the future for sure. So I think that that one huge problem is this whole city is overpaved. There are large green areas, and especially in Northeast, there's a lot of green to work with. But you've seen like the endless concrete, the sprawl, and that's something where maybe not green gardens, but things like permeable pavements, solar roofs. There are other things that might be able to help that are part of this process to make Houston more sustainable. But yeah, I saw this figure, really struck me. I know that they calculate the total damages of Harvey in like hundreds of billions of dollars, which I think include like economic disruption and so forth. The damages to housing property were about 11 billion. Do you want to guess what percentage of that came from river flooding, from bayou flooding directly? 25%. 75% is water sitting on top of concrete backing up into house, right? So when you think about that, anything we can do to make this surface more permeable, whether it's a rain garden or some other solution, is something we should do.
Let's go here next.
You mentioned about rain gardens. Do you see a lot of reluctance on Harris County flood control with taking this? Because I've seen that problem in they're so anti-pumps. And we've seen Louisiana solve their flooding problem with pumps, Texas City, the Dutch. And I think we got a group in charge that's just too reluctant to really fix the problem.
Yeah, I mean, levee and pump systems, as you said, have worked wonders in places like the Netherlands, where there would be a lot less Netherlands if it weren't for systems, right? And but I think it's also about thinking short versus long term on it too. I think I've talked to coastal specialists who told me that the two cities in the US that can't be saved are New Orleans and Miami. So just because of the particular geography we're dealing with there, sea level rise eventually is going to overwhelm both in different ways. So a levee system in New Orleans is holding it, it's keeping the water out for now, but it's not going to work forever. Sometimes you do have to retreat. You have to think about retreat relocation. But in Houston, that shouldn't be a problem we have to deal with for a very long time, centuries probably. So the real question is, as this gets to be a wetter, hotter place, what can we do in terms of how we design our city to mitigate the negative side of that? And maybe pumps will come into that. I don't know that necessarily we have to do that, because we're dealing with more periodical, intense, catastrophic rain events rather than like just a presence of the ocean kind of always right outside our door. But yeah, I think we have to think creatively, for sure, and outside the box.
So, a few things, want to shout out Exploration Green, in Clear Lake. They used to have a flooding problem, and during Hurricane Harvey, my understanding is they did not flood.
Oh, okay.
Exploration Green was an old golf course that they all the water traps, they put in native plants and wetland plants, and they put in a bunch of trees and other native plants. It's almost like just a sanctuary out there. And so, and it's closer to the coast than we are.
Yeah.
So,
And-
second thing, was also, we still have a problem with, our aquifer, but we are still taking water out of our aquifer, and our aquifers are losing water. And so, the native plants are really helping that. I'm wondering if our health strips, like, the place between the sidewalk and the curb, which is kind of, a lot of it's supposed to be always part of our yard anyway, like, is that right, that we have a big place for any
Yeah.
garden?
Yeah, if you come to Midtown, the ones they did on Bagby Street are kind of like that, digging out that area and really creating quite a lot of space, and they have plants in there too, but it's got a nice little detention capacity. What's that?
They go out on the frog, some of them,
Yeah.
I saw.
The other thing is having in my neighborhood, is the new houses that they're putting in these little mini cisterns. To grab the water, and then they have a little pump that pumps the water from that cistern out into the street. Which I guess is good, but it seems like a rain garden, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially like a different permutation of the rain barrel idea, right? You have a way to hold the water in place, and that can be really helpful. Again, it only depends on the amount of rainfall you're receiving. And I think we have to plan, with these worst cases in mind, what are we gonna do? Harvey plus 10%, right? That may not happen for 15 years, it may not happen for 20 years, but it could happen next year too. So we have to kind of be ready for those eventualities, I think, in our planning.
I have comments, lots of comments. Limited. One, I just want to mention, I see churches everywhere I live. That's just got massive amounts of ground that they just want, waste that space. I can fit them. So,
Hold it close to your mouth.
She said that lots of churches with lots of space, and they're using a lot of lawns.
you know how I guess it was Katy Prairie Conservancy and some others that make those 9 native planting designs with the 9 per sun, 9 per shade. So the San Antonio River Authority has a really nice rain garden plan, and it is 9 plants. And there's like 2 plants that don't belong here. I mentioned it several times to the right people, I think, to pick the best 2 plants to replace those 2 with. But if we just copy that, we have 9 natives for a rain garden that we can be publicized. Another thing is, so I was friends with the man who used to run the Green Building Resource Center at the Permitting Center. And I asked him, why, because people come there for permits for everything, doing things same old way, and that's why can't he put up posters about better ways? And he was told that the city doesn't want him doing that. So, I mean, we could attend city council meetings and pester them about, these kinds of things.
Thank you. Those are great ideas. And one idea, I just want to build on your ideas. I think we're asking specifically what this organization could do, and you could help to design, kits for rain gardens. Here's a group of plants you get together to design. Maybe there's a couple of different options for different types of layouts and sizes, and that would be really helpful, because for somebody like me who's not a plant specialist, I know the plants are important, but I don't know, and then I just start Googling, and I hopefully find that Texas A&M resource. But even then, there's way more plants than I know what to do with, so I don't know which plants play nicely together and sort of which would be a part of a robust ecology. So that would be a great idea, maybe to develop.
I've started such design, a couple of listings for North, South Houston, and would love to work with people, get ideas on this.
People want to go to a city council meeting, think it them. I happen to have attended the city council meeting, where there was presentations by multiple people, each talking about a different angle. It's really effective. In fact, it was so effective. This was what had the city pass non-discrimination bills that caused the whiplashing bathroom bills all over the country. They were really, really effective. They're different, various forms that were same issue. Discrimination.
Thank you, working. And what I'll also say is in the interviews I've done for this research project, I've talked to people in Harris County Flood Control and other organizations, and I found that there are green infrastructure enthusiasts in those organizations. They're not always the loudest voices, but there are people who would support these initiatives there too. They understand why. And in fact, one guy from flood control told me, it's green infrastructure is obviously going to be more of a part of our paradigm going forward. We're still figuring out how we get there. So a little push from the public could be helpful, as you're suggesting.
Yeah, what about underground tunnels? I guess Austin has like a couple miles of them. And they don't have any there, so.
We have system.
Yeah. I mean, again, my feeling about the deep tunnels after talking to the engineers is that they're not good value. It's like they're really, really expensive. And they wouldn't really help reduce peak flow during major flood events very much. So it sounds good because you're investing a lot of money and that sounds good. Oh my God, we're really taking this seriously. But if you put $100 million into rain gardens in Houston, I think you'd have a lot more impact than a mile of tunnel. So.
From online, is there any interest by the flood control district or city of Houston or Harris County in promoting rain gardens and including provisions in local building codes?
Not concerted support yet, but as I said, I think there are people in those organizations who do support it. I know because I've interviewed them. And I do think there's more and more interest in green infrastructure, not to replace, nobody's saying tear away the concrete causeways or anything, but rather to supplement, to augment, to work together with green infrastructure can do a lot. And the cool thing is it's something we don't have to wait for somebody else to do for us. Like we actually can work either at the home level, the neighborhood level, the subdivision level, the HOA level to make some real changes. So I think it's empowering.
And there's one more question. Is there an organization that will come out and do an assessment of green spaces in neighborhoods for designing rain gardens?
I think that's a great question. Yeah, there are a lot of people who will advise on rain gardens. The expertise in rain gardens is actually pretty deep. I don't know how deep it is in Houston compared to other cities where they've done more of it, but I do think there are a lot of people here, and I definitely have some names I can put people in touch with, of people who do that kind of advising. But again, I would also emphasize the simplicity of the design, the DIY capacity of it. It's hard to do it wrong. Like you're not probably going to harm anything. You do have to call 811 to make sure you're not digging into something that's going to create another kind of infrastructure problem. But as long as you stay pretty shallow and you stay on your land, it's hard to get it wrong. So I think it should be more of a kind of creative experimental process. Doreen was talking about, testing out the plants and adding new plants and, that sort of thing. Make it more joyful and less feeling like, there's like something you could get wrong. I think I would say that's a more fun approach.
I don't say I didn't add laws and environment, I just dug until I was tired of digging and then like this.
Yeah, you don't have to have logs. There's a lot of things you can put in the bottom.
Lady Gardner.
Logs not required.
And when we tell our neighbors about a rain garden and they give us the mosquito argument, what do we say?
I mean, my experience is it reduces, because if you have a standing pool of water there, cue the thing. If you have that standing pool of water, that already is going to be a mosquito breeding ground. So I say like start, know your land and know the areas that are already sort of having standing water, and then those are the most obvious places to do the rain gardens. If you want to do other things in addition, that's fine. But if you make them, remember there's like a little hill of earth over it. The area where the water is going to be is below the soil level. So it's not going to totally get rid of the insect population, but I think it mitigates it.
For the sake of argument, healthy flora, native flora brings healthy fauna, bats and birds.
Yeah.
So
Think of what you're doing for the bat population.
Will bring not just the pests, but the predators that eat
Yes, dragonflies, get those dragonflies.
You could turn your rain garden on, which is really.
So do you have any comparison of rain garden versus simply planting all rooted, deep rooted native plants?
You know, I don't, but that's what I'd love to hear more from y'all about too, who have more experience with the plants themselves. I have heard from people who know more than I do that some of the, because we're doing attempted a coastal prairie restoration on part of Rice's campus. There used to be a gully called Harris Gully that ran through that campus that was culverted, you know, some years later. But there's a really, you know, tenacious group of faculty and students who've been working on trying to restore that prairie. And one of the things they discovered is the soil was all wrong. They had the wrong soil. They were trying to use like modern city soil to recreate a prairie. And so the first thing they had to do is get the soil right. And so they've been working over time to get the soil right, then get these native plants in there. But I've heard that some of their root systems run several feet deep, which means they're not, you know, they're not shallow. And when they're in there tenaciously, that has a lot of capacity for water absorption.
The roots can be, on some of the big prairie grasses, can be 15, 20 feet deep.
Wow, so okay.
And Land has some statistics, I haven't asked her what she found in her CPC presentation, that St. Augustine grass alone can absorb an inch of rain an hour.
Wow.
And prairie plants with those deep roots can, I remember her statistics, but I didn't get that number, they can absorb 8 or 9 inches of water an hour. So if you have a yard full of prairie plants, you are less likely to have flooding than if you have St. Augustine grass.
And if you have a bigger space where you can sort of amplify that effect, again, if you have an HOA or something like that, green spaces that you could put in a pocket prairie, maybe even a bigger impact on that collectively.
I'll leave you with this. This situation that you're describing reminds me a lot of even climate control in relation to stuff right now, but like wearing masks during COVID, where one person necessarily wearing a mask won't make a huge impact or even stop it. But if we collectively come together, we can mitigate.
Yeah, no, that's a great way of putting it. And I think there's a quiet power in collective action in this way. And again, it's not as though everyone has to wait for some deferred gratification. You get a pretty garden right away, right? That's right there. You all get to enjoy that, but then you also get this added benefit of collective detention capacity to get out of. You know, again, if we could do it really for most buildings in Houston, we could get to billions of gallons, which would be amazing.
I wanted to ask you about the food program that Texas Council and then Houston Houston County District. So they're basically.
Tell us about it.
So they work with first time nonviolent offenders in a house that they. I don't know if it completely wipes off the record, but basically they go out and they make them pick up and understand neighborhood, especially with second things. So you can call them and be like, hey, there's like on the site over here. When you get it, there's a lot of stuff and whatnot. And they'll go out there and they're really good when I've seen them work the art back, you know.
That's great. Yeah, because if there is labor involved, especially if you're doing bigger things like.
And they get
There's a more than a poetic justice there.
I don't know.
Posted.
Yeah, and there's a kind of
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, so I have a physics question. So doesn't water usually go to the lower, like it goes to the lowest point, right? So my question is with these rain gardens, why are they, how do they work if they're built up so that they're higher than the ground around it?
Well, not radically higher. So you've got the dugout in the center, and that's where the water is pooling. And then you've got the woody material that helps to hold more water in it. And then probably some dirt and soil, and above that, whatever you're going to plant in. And again, the hugelkultur is tall. It can be quite tall, several feet tall sometimes. But the rain garden is just like a little mound, so that one picture that I had of the funnel, I would say it's maybe, maybe it's 8 to 10 inches above the elevation around it, so it's not a huge.
So the water wouldn't run off top of it.
No, yeah, it's like a little berm, and again, it could be designed where that berm could do something for you, but in our case, it was just to facilitate giving those plants a chance, because what's underneath isn't yet good soil. So it's giving the plants some soil to nourish them while there's decomposition happening below. And the water, what's holding the water in place is the fact that our soil's got a lot of clay in it, and so the water gets in there like a swimming pool for a while, but it does, it infiltrates slowly over time. But it gives, what it's not doing is backing up into a house or backing up into the street where it could be creating a bigger problem.
But could you do something similar without putting it on top, just having like a little depression?
Sure.
With a bunch of really thirsty plants in it?
Totally, yeah, you do you. I mean, I think this is open to all sorts of people.
I just have a comment really. It's everything positive, right? Beauty and flood mitigation. So the incentive, I'm thinking who could help incentivize all this? Who had something really to gain? Insurance companies.
Yeah.
They could incentivize the businesses. I mean, it's not expensive. Homeowners. I don't know. Just a thought.
Time to carbon credits too.
Well, I think we're seeing the insurance companies that have like the best actuarial information, like way better than the general public does. And the fact that they're so aggressively pulling out of places like Florida now, to me is a signal about habitability. And it's probably not, even though it's going to get hotter and wetter here, it's probably not that which would drive people out of a city, but lack of insurance might. People can't insure their homes. There's just a dead loss, right? That's a much harder situation to live in. And I hope we don't get there in Houston, but it's becoming increasingly a problem in some areas, even with public backstops. Here, yeah. Well, the National Flood Insurance Program is technically bankrupt. So, it's there by, people like the Fletcher and others who have to go and fight, every time this comes up to get more money. But if that spigot gets turned off, the private insurers, it's going to be much harder for us. And Harris County Flood Control, if you read the fine prints on their website, they say they have the 100-year and the 500-year floodplain, but they say there every single building in Harris County should have flood insurance, which we don't.
Okay, I think this is gonna be our last question. Yeah. Really burning one.
So as a social anthropologist,
Yes.
how do we convince people that rain gardens are beautiful and manicured low lawns are not? In here, we're like less than a percentage of people in Houston who think rain gardens are beautiful. Everyone else thinks that those manicured lawns with fertilizer on them is a thing of beauty.
Well, the most famous anthropologist of all time, Margaret Mead, said, never underestimate a small group of committed people and what they can achieve. So I think Margaret would say, we might look small, but we might pack a punch. But seriously, I think, the best way to do it is to do it and demonstrate it, just talk about how great it is, and they see how nice it is. And, I think people are often more led by the beauty side of it, unless you really have had a real bad flooding problem where this is part of the solution. I think what's going to bring people to it is the beauty of the plants, that experience. And I think there is lots of psychological research and other research that shows people are happier when they're around, even small green spaces. It improves air quality, it improves mood. There are all sorts of ways in which we as a species evolved to have a lot of interactions with plants, not just to eat them, but really is part of very rich, photosynthetic environments or whatever, plants are amazing. So I think try to lean on that. And then of course, if you can say it also does other things that are helpful for the city too, and I think. It's been a few years since we had a major flood, but we've had these 2,000-year floods and 500-year floods in the past decade, another one's coming soon. And when that happens, people will immediately begin thinking, oh my God, what are we gonna do with the flooding again? And this is one thing we can tell them, well, it's not the whole solution, but it's something we can do right now that will make an impact.
We'll be here.